As the world copes with the pressure of controlling the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, the need to provide accurate information has grown exponentially. The novel coronavirus, which first emerged towards the end of 2019 and initially drew very little attention from the world leaders, has disrupted almost everything. But what has remained constant is the indispensable role of media that it plays in the society. A very good afternoon to all my viewers who are connected with me on Zoom and Facebook Live. I, Mehak Pandit, Assistant Professor, School of Journalism and Mass Communication, is here for this webinar on a very relevant topic as we cope with the pandemic and a constant query that I keep getting from my students and surely all the journalism aspirants have at this moment. That is media as a career in the post-COVID era. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome my esteemed guest, Professor Amrish Saxena, for this webinar on behalf of School of Journalism and Mass Communication, K.R. Mangalam University, Gurugram. Professor Amrish Saxena is presently Dean, Delhi Metropolitan Education Media School. He is an accomplished media professional, educator, trainer, researcher, author, anchor, and political analyst. He has worked at different media platforms ranging from print, radio, television to films. Before switching over to media academics, Dr. Saxena has played a long inning in the active journalism, having served 3 prominent English dailies, including The Pioneer, and 3 Hindi newspapers, including Aaj. In television journalism, he has worked with Vinod Dua for first ever TV Hindi news magazine, Parak, during 1990s. Dr. Saxena has authored many books, including the most sought after book, Fundamentals of Reporting and Editing. All of journalism aspirants must have read that book. He has to his credit many research papers presented in national, international seminars and conferences and published in research journals and books. And I can go on and on. So welcome to this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as we start with the webinar and before going on into the details about the career in the post-COVID era, I want to begin with a very important question that reports like in journal, we know that they neither should create unwarranted panic and nor underplay the gravity of the situation. I want to know from you that do you think media is actually doing balanced reporting?
It's a difficult question in the sense that how do we decide what is the balance? And balance is never possible. In fact, the only thing is whenever we talk about journalism, whether print or electronic, the only thing which is taught and which we all learn as journalists, that we have to provide all that information which is benefiting the people. So whatever information is being given by television news channel these days, we have to look into whether it's really beneficial to the people or not. So if we look at the news which is being broadcast by different television channels, then definitely it's the information which is benefiting the people in one way or the other. Now, other parameters of news, if we look at, then what is the impact that's making on the people? And there is a question mark. In fact, like if we categorize the news as positive or negative, then obviously, even if I don't go into deep into positive and negative, but what is happening in most of the channels, then whatever news they are broadcasting, that is not making some good impression on the people. Many people are under depression because every time you are listening about bad situation, bad shape of the migrants, then they are being killed in some accident, they are starving. But then the point is that this is completely an unparalleled situation, and if bad things are happening, news cannot be good. So if bad things are happening, the bad things are to be broadcast, those things are to be reported. So I mean, we cannot compare this COVID-19 situation with the normal situation, but more or less, if you ask me to make evaluation of the quality of the reporting which is being done on television news channels, I believe, I have the impression that it's more or less of a good standard, of good quality.
All right. Okay. Of course, I can relate to whatever you have said because of course, this is pandemic. I just want to know from you, like, what kind of lessons do you think this important declaration holds for journalism?
Sorry, I mean, can you further elaborate the
What,
question?
yeah, yeah. What are the lessons do we get from this particular
Okay.
situation? What kind of changes we can see in journalism after this?
Lessons are the most important lesson that has been learned by everybody. I mean, across professions and occupation is to have patience, to keep restraint, to be cool, and then to go on with whatever you can do, even, I mean, not so favorable situation around you. And if we talk about the lessons that is to be learned by the professionals, so as professional, whether the journalists or the media educators, we all have learned how to do more work in a difficult situation, because that is how you can meet the challenge. If the time is different, if the time is difficult, then the response also has to be tough. So the professionals have learned all that. If I look around, everybody is everybody is doing whatever was expected from that person during normal hours. And after this pandemic has gone, even that will remain. This quality of working hard, the quality of be tough, and the quality of not getting under depression even in a difficult situation.
All right. Like you have already mentioned that how things are going on and eventually how you foresee things. I want to just want you to get into detail about the trends and propositions you foresee for journalism because we're going to talk about career post-COVID era. So let's just understand that how trends and propositions you foresee for journalism as a profession in the post-COVID era.
The prospects are bright, no doubt. There are some setbacks. Now these setbacks are bound to happen whenever there is a turmoil, whenever there is a big change in the system, and this has not happened for the first time since the time, if we even go back and look at the growth of media across the world in our country, we will find that the changes have been happening either because of the change in technology or in change in the social, political, economic scenario in the country. But then that has always been gradual. Now, what has happened differently this time, that this has come in one go. Suddenly something has happened, and then we are trying to coping up with that kind of situation, and then we are trying to make an assessment what will happen after this phase. Now, if I can go a little backward, and if I can tell you in very, very brief how the changes have happened in media since 1950s or 60s or 70s in independent India, when there used to be only newspapers in the country, all the technology that was there initially, there used to be treadle machines, there was to be the monotype setting. And when this was taken over by lino and mono machines, so everybody was concerned what will happen to the hand compositors, because that era was diminishing, and what will happen to the machine men who knew only to run the treadle machine. And then after 10 years, 20 years, what happened? Then those lino mono machines also gone, and then as far as the printing technology is concerned, the rotary machine took over. Then in the 90s, that rotary machine also gone, and then that was taken over the offset printing machine. And as far as the composing technology was concerned, that was also changed. So for a short time, this PTS photo typesetting came, and finally this the current thing that which started 25-30 years back. This whole desktop thing came, wherein the composing or the typing was done directly on the computers, and refined versions of offset printing machine happened. And if you look into the working of a newspaper till 90s, what was happening, there used to be the pages were being made by the makeup men. They were taking the printouts, cutting from that, and then they were pasting all that on a broadsheet, and the pages were being made. Now, when all that was gone, everybody was worried. What will happen to makeup men? What will happen to the operators, the computer operators who were composing? Because now there are no compositors, no operators, no makeup men. Everything has been taken over by the sub-editors or the editors themselves. They themselves type their stories. They themselves make their pages. So these kind of concerns have always been there whenever there is a change. This time also there are majorly technological changes which have happened. Though this technology that has come to the forefront, we already had this technology. There is nothing new. But then very less use of this technology was happening. Like if we talk about the whole concept of mojo, mobile journalism, this came, many years back. Few channels even started doing it in India. NDTV was the first channel which started doing it. But now what has happened because of this pandemic, every channel has gone for mojo. So what will happen tomorrow, that this mojo will be prevalent, will be incorporated in the system in almost all the news channels. So that's a new thing which will come up. If a new technology would have come, then the new kind of jobs will come up. So the nature of jobs will change. The people who were well versed with the old technology, old kind of jobs, all that will vanish. Like if I can tell you the most important thing, there used to be always a big fleet of cameramen in any television news channel. If I can give you the example of Aaj Tak, at one time they were having 35-40 cameramen. But that kept on reduced and reduced. But now there is a bleak future for cameramen in any news channel. If I can tell you about ZTV, they also had a very big fleet, but now that will come down, and that had already started 3 or 4 years back. That reduction in the number of jobs of the cameraman in a news channel. Now that will further come down. So there will be no cameraman when the reporter is going to the field covering something. He himself will be doing everything. He will have the mojo kit, and then he will report it. He will do his piece to camera and will submit it in the newsroom. So the kind of jobs which are there, that are definitely going to change in the post-COVID period.
All right. Thank you so much for telling in detail. You have got through from the technological change and everything, and how the nature of jobs keep changing. Of course, there is another important thing that I, as a researcher, have noticed, that we have recorded the highest consumption of television, social media, radio. So, with all of these consumption increasing, where do we see the print journalism here? Because there are a lot of students who
See,
aspire to
print
become
journalism,
print journalists. Yeah.
yeah, print journalism will always be there. One important thing here I can tell you to make everything clear: no one media vanishes other media. Initially it happens. Like I give you another example from the historical context. What happened when television came? So everybody was worried what will happen to radio in 70s and 80s, and actually there was a setback to radio, and for about 10-15 years radio suffered a lot. Then what happened, and this continued for about 10 years or so, but then the radio came back in a new flavor. Similarly, what happened when television came and when Doordarshan started in the country, they started showing films. Initially, it was one film in a week, then it was two films in a week. So what happened? People stopped going to theaters, and everybody was waiting for a film to be screened on a television channel on Doordarshan. But so obviously the theaters, the cinema halls got a setback, and I remember for about 10 years, 15 years, their condition was very bad. And I personally know number of cinema halls were converted into the cold storage. Now what happened? We all know there was the cinema came back, then in a different form, like the multiplexes came up and all. So radio came back in the form of this FM broadcasting. Cinema came back after suffering of that onslaught in the form of multiplexes. So no one medium can demolish, can eliminate a one particular medium. And finally, what I want to communicate to you is that every medium coexists with the other medium. So print media will remain there. Print media, I mean, if you should look at the print media, that it's the foundation. Whether we talk about radio, films, television, whatever, but then print media is in the foundation. So foundation will remain there, whether you erect some 4 stories building or 6 story or 7 story, but then foundation will always be there. So nobody should feel concerned as to what will happen to print media. And if print media is there, then obviously the jobs will also be there. The job profiles will change. The expectation from the people who are working in print media will change. So the people who will be coming now to join the print media, they must know that what are the changes happening, and they have to prepare themselves for those changes.
Well, all right. Thank you so much, sir. I'll get back to this question that what can actually students do to build up their skills. Before that,
Yeah.
I'm going to head to another very relevant question that we were just discussing in the classroom. In fact, virtual classrooms. Like according to them, the advertising model is now outdated. Only some forms of carefully vetted
Sorry. Yeah.
sponsorship seem to be acceptable, and the
Uh,
preferred revenue stream is again
Meg,
based on readers. Yeah.
Meg,
So
sorry, can you repeat the
yeah,
question?
sure, sir. So I was telling that according to the students of today's generation, the advertising model seems to be outdated. Only some forms of carefully vetted sponsorship seems to be acceptable. And in fact, the revenue stream seems to be changed. It is because the old revenue stream used to be based on readers. Will we see any change in the revenue model or the advertising model post COVID era?
Here also I have to go to a little background, and I have to tell you the whole economics of a news organization. And we all study and we even teach this. There is a dual market economy, whether we talk about newspapers or television channels, or though on radio it does not apply that way. Dual market economy means the most distinct thing with a media organization, news organization per se, is that there are two streams of revenue. One is the advertising revenue, another is the circulation revenue. And there have never been a balance between the two. Most of the newspapers, most of the television channels, they bank more on advertising revenue than in the case of newspapers, it is circulation revenue. In the case of the television channels, it is the revenue that comes from the viewers, from the subscribers, right? So the revenue, if you look at the revenue model, the advertising revenue has always been in the front. Like if I can give a very vague idea, because I don't have the statistics right now, if in a newspaper or news channel, out of the total revenue, 80% is coming from the advertising, then 20% might be coming in the case of newspaper from the newspaper readers, and in the case of television channels from the subscribers. Now when the advertising has got a hit, the major area of concern is this only these days for any media person and those who are involved in the media working in some way, that if advertising is reduced, then what will happen? Again, I would say this might be a temporary setback. That temporary setback is bound to be there, because till the time for 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, because till for last 2 months we are in the lockdown. So obviously, if during the lockdown the industries are closed down, no trading is happening, nothing is being, I mean, major things are not being sold in the retail market. So when there is no market and when there is nothing to be sold, so majority of the producers and the products, they have stopped doing advertising, except whatever prior commitments they had. Though in certain areas, in certain sectors, we find an increase in advertising. For
Mhm.
instance, anything related to medicine and health. And you would have noticed that many pharmaceutical companies have increased their advertising on new pharmaceutical companies. Those who were not there earlier in advertising, they have entered the market. So this we can witness even during these 2 months only, that new players, new advertisers will come. And the
Yeah.
existing advertisers, they will again come back after few
Yeah.
months. But then what will happen, that share of advertising, what we call the whole media plan that any advertiser does, this means how much advertising is to be done in print, how much advertising in radio, how much advertising in television, and how much advertising on the digital. So till this date, digital advertising has been very, very less if we compare it to print advertising or the TV advertising. Now that change is bound to occur, that has already started happening. The people will go to more digital advertising. So that will happen. The form and shape of advertising will change. For a certain period, definitely advertising revenue is going to be hit, and that newspapers and news channels are bound to suffer because of that. This, but then I believe from 6 months to 1 year, the things will stabilize, advertising will remain there. And if we talk about the mainstream media, mainstream newspapers and mainstream channels, they are obviously worried. But then after this 6 months to 1 year time, what will happen? They will get more advertising for their web editions or on
Yeah.
their online newspapers. So and then the same will happen in the case of the websites of the web editions of the television news channels. So they will not, television channels will not be getting the advertisement to that extent which are being screened, but those advertisements are there in the digital on their digital platform. So the shape will change and the revenue will pick up gradually, obviously, but then for a certain time there is a hit. So every newspaper, every news channel has to be prepared for that period, how to manage during this 1 year time at the most.
Yeah. All right, sir. Thank you so much. I know you have been constantly saying that things will change for a span of time, but everything will, come back. Okay, so there are a lot of questions popping up related to sports journalism. Like, of course, it has taken a massive hit during the pandemic. So, how do you see sports journalism post COVID?
Sports journalism will not get any hit. It's a moment, because if the sports are bound to happen, the only thing which has happened during this 2 months or 3 months time, if we take the whole of the world into consideration, because the sports events started postponing and cancellations started happening at least 3-4 months back. The last thing
Yeah.
which happened, the postponement for a year of the Olympic Games. So obviously, if no sports is happening, then no sports journalism will there. If we look at from this perspective, then we find that the things are bleak. But then once the situation normalizes, whatever time it takes, but then it is bound to normalize at the most. If I make my own assessment, at the most 3 months or 4 months for sports. So say for instance, if sports events start happening from September, October onwards, then sports events have to be covered. And sports is one such thing which has to be covered live. There can be no deferred coverage, there can be no delayed coverage. It has to be live. If a cricket match is happening, then a live broadcast has to happen. If an Olympic event is happening, it has to be broadcast live. It has to be covered live. So if the live coverage is happening, then obviously there will be a requirement of journalists, there will be a requirement of cameraman, there will be a requirement of the technical person. So sports journalism will not be affected in any way once the sports events start.
All right. Yeah, all right. So, during the COVID-19, that media has proved that its value is growing. But surely we need to find better ways to measure it, because unlike other sectors, you have already mentioned it, like media sector, coronavirus has created both the opportunities and challenges. So, regarding the measures where we need to deal with, because media's value is growing. So, what kind of measures do you think we need to take care? Like, what kind of measures can be taken?
uh, uh, what kind of measures who you are expected to take? I mean, from
Yeah, yeah.
the question is targeted to whom? I mean, from policymakers, from media owners, or to I mean, what
Everybody
do
in
you?
general, everybody in general, because of course its value is growing, but we need ways to measure how it is working and how it should work, and how, because of course media is working 24/7 at even at this situation. So, all over, like in general form, how do you see?
Uh, yeah, if we talk about only about media initially, at least, because if we talk about the journalists, if we talk about those who are on the top positions in a newspaper, on a news channel, the professionals and the senior people, and if we refer to those who are the proprietors or the owners or the promoters of newspapers and news channels. Now, uh, for the journalists, obviously, there's a really a tough time for those who are working round the clock and who are facing all this adverse situation. But then they have to be on their heels and they have to do the reporting. They have to cover that. So the most difficult things are for the reporters. But then one bad thing which is there for the journalists is that apprehending trouble. The proprietors, they have started cutting down the strength, and that's a bad thing for the journalist. Obviously, the proprietors should not have done it. I mean, those who are doing it, not all the channels or all the newspapers are doing it. But then every proprietor is thinking, what will happen tomorrow, because after all it is a business. So that's a temporary setback for the journalists. For the people who are on the top position, they have to be wise. They have to be to work with foresight, and they have to look into this, that without the ground workers, without the real workforce that you have in the form of the reporters and the editors, the sub editors or the copy editors or the video editors and all that, nothing will happen. So there is a need to protect their interest. And as far as the proprietors is concerned, though it's a business, I believe no business can be run with a short-sightedness, wherein some challenge occurs, some problem happens, and then you are on the back foot, and then you are trying to cut the size, or you are trying to reduce the salaries. That should not happen in any business. There has to be some period which is, which is a period which the proprietors always think that the profits are not coming. But then the first and the foremost thing which I believe nobody have talked about, nobody has raised this, which I'm going to tell, that is that what the government is doing to safeguard the interest of the news media. Normally, we find that the relationship between the news media and the government is that of adversary. But then when it's a difficult situation, and then everybody has to be the stakeholder. If the government is fighting with whatever is happening today, everybody is, for the policemen are fighting with this situation, the doctors and the paramedical staff, they are fighting with this situation. And then same way the journalists are doing this, but then neither the proprietors of the news organization nor the government, they have not yet thought of doing something for safeguarding the interest of the journalists and the news organizations. So I believe that the government, or whatever this 20 lakh crore package they have announced, they should do something from this whole package and announce some package to the media organizations. But mind it, when I say some package should be announced to media organizations, does not mean that you give some money to the owners. That the owners of media organizations will keep that money with themselves, and then the benefit of all that will not reach the journalists. So
Yeah.
some such kind of scheme should be brought by the government, wherein the interests of the journalists are protected in the form of their medical care, in the form of other reliefs, in the form of their some insurance scheme launched for them, to be launched for them, in the form of some compensation if some journalists suffer and some casualty happen during the performance, during the discharge of the job, and it should not be given to the proprietors. And even if some part is given to the proprietors, they should be told, and a commitment should be taken from the newspaper owners and the newspaper and the news channel owners, that they will not retrench anybody, they will not cut the salary of anybody, and they will take care of their journalists and the non-journalist employees.
All right. Thank you so much. You've already answered my question, which I really wanted to ask you, Nest, about the securing the interest of the media person. Absolutely, it is very necessary because they are working 24/7 for giving us all of the important information that is very relevant at this post-pandemic when we are closed at our homes. Yesterday, I was just reading a report by the International Press Institute that
Mm.
states that amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the free flow of news and information is more essential than ever, and then ensuring open dialogue and the exchange of vital information. So I want to know from you that how do you see the press freedom restrictions in this exceptional situation? Like, should there be low down, or how do you see all of this media functioning and restrictions?
Uh, Yeah, okay. As far as the restrictions on the press is concerned, during this COVID-19 period,
Hmm.
I don't find there are any restrictions, or rather, if I can elaborate on this, now two, three things we need to understand, particularly during this current phase. Now, the point is that every information which is being provided by the mainstream media or by the social media, it has to be accurate. So that's one major problem. Now, on the social media, the things are difficult to handle. And because of this, the government wanted that only that information should be broadcast, or only that information should be published and posted, which is officially released by the government. Though in a difficult situation during this pandemic, everybody will accept that the government, whatever the government is thinking or trying to do, is right. But then there is a problem here. The problem is that it's not the question of some crisis. Crisis keep on happening as far as the journalism is concerned. It may be a comparatively major crisis. The crisis happens whenever there's a communal riot happening. The crisis happens whenever there's some accident as happening, some natural disaster would have happened. But then never the government is allowed to take over the whole news, wherein the government is permitting what is to be broadcast, what is to be permitted. And that is why whenever when the government was trying to do this, this was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not permit the government to make sure that whatever the government is releasing, only that information is to be broadcast, is to be published, because that would have meant censorship. So that was not allowed by the Supreme Court. So that is not happening in any case on the face of it. But then there is another type of regulation or restriction which under normal circumstances also the government does, and these days also the government is doing. The government has set up an organization which we know as Electronic Media Monitoring Center. So the monitoring of all the channels is being done there. And what the government does, if the government finds that any channel is broadcasting any such news which is factually not correct, which is somewhere damaging the society, somewhere harming the society, then the government sends a directive to the concerned news channels to be beware of that and not to do that. So to that extent, that restriction is there, but that restriction is there even in the normal circumstances, wherein the Information and Broadcasting Ministry is issuing certain notice, certain direction to a particular channel. So that is the restriction which is happening. But then one thing I must tell you, whether restriction or no restriction, any news on in newspapers, news channels, and the digital media has to be accredited to some reliable source, which is the very sacrosanct thing which we believe has to be there in journalism. We cannot give the figures that how many casualties have been there because of COVID-19, covering something on our own sources. So how many people died has to be from a credible source. How many people have been tested, that number has to be from the credible source. What kind of precautions need to be taken or not to be taken has to be credible source, like it should come from the health ministry and all. So all that precaution has to be taken by the news organizations and the journalists. And I believe, to the extent I have the first-hand account of whatever is happening in the newspapers and the news channels, more or less the mainstream media is following it. The problem is with the digital media, and interestingly, digital media cannot be controlled by any government through any means. As I told you about the mainstream media, the government can issue certain directions, the government can issue certain notices, can keep a check on that, and in the worst scenario, the government can act based on this Cable Television Network Regulation Act. If any channel is not listening to the government and is trying to spread all fake news and all, but then the digital media is difficult to handle, though we have the IT Act, but that is not sufficient to handle the digital news content, and particularly the social media. If we say digital media, then again here we have to divide it two parts for our understanding. One, digital media which belongs to a news channel or a newspaper, that is again can again be under control. Under control means, I mean, as far as the spreading fake news is concerned, it's difficult to spread fake news by a mainstream media even on the digital platform, because the government can restrict that. But then if we talk about the social media, that's another aspect of the digital media. Social media is difficult to handle. Definitely the only thing that government can do at any given point is that the government can control, government can regulate the service provider. Like if there are some fake news, some wrong news is being posted on the Facebook, then the government can put the onus of Facebook to keep a check on that. Similarly, if fake news are being spread on WhatsApp, then the government can put certain regulations on the owners of the WhatsApp so that no fake news can be spread.
Yeah. Along with that, even the consumers need to get smart. They need to rectify, because a lot of seminars have been happening wherein people are actually telling how to check fake news. Of course, that is also to be done. All right, we can just go on and on, but right now I think we must take the Q&As. We have a lot of questions popping
Yeah.
up. So there's one
Yeah.
question from a student who says that career options for those who are about to graduate, or of course for the people who want to pursue journalism. They want to know what the career options.
Uh, Before the career option, I would like to tell everybody who is aspiring to take admission in a journalism and mass communication program. One thing has not changed. Even before if we look at the scenario which was there before COVID-19 and during 19 and after this, one thing has not changed, will never change, that if you want to become a media person, whether you want to become a journalist or an advertising professional or a PR professional or a filmmaker, you have to be good in writing and you have to be good in speaking, and you have to be good in the handling of technology. These things have never changed, are not changing, are not going to change. So if you are aspiring to take admission in a journalism and mass communication program, think that you are good in this. Good means if you have a knack for this. I mean, obviously, when you take admission, you will get enough time in a bachelor's program or in a master program. In a bachelor's program, you will get 3 years time to further learn the trade, or 2 years time in masters to further learn the things. But then whether you have that kind of aptitude, whether you have the basics to further go on that, like whether if you are writing good, then there is a time that you can improve your writing. If you speak good, then if there are certain shortcomings, all that can be taken care of while you are studying in a structured program in a university or college. And then whether you are good in technology, whether you have that kind of knack, if you are not familiar with the technology, if you are running away from the technology, then obviously there is a problem. If all these three things are there, then there are number of career options which will be opening up for a person in the time to come.
All right. Riddhi, you must have got your answer. You have a similar question related to the scope of BJMC. We have another question. It's from an anonymous participant, that after the pandemic, how much the media sector will be affected, and especially the job opportunities. Of course, these are repetitive questions, but
Yeah.
that's the main concern actually.
See, one who is taking admission, obviously, as I already said, this is a difficult time. The things are not in good shape in media organizations. No doubt about this. Another 3-4 months time, the same situation will prevail. And as I already said, minimum 6 months to 1 year time we have to wait for the things to become to return to normalcy. But then after that there will be an upward growth, as I can look at. And anybody who is aspiring to take admission today in a media program need not to worry at all, because they will be in the job market after 3 years. So definitely after 3 years the things will completely change, and things will change for good.
All right. So we have another question from Subitro Bose. Like you mentioned that we must take the information from the credible source. So he wants to know that does the credible source always give authentic figures? Why there is so much of underreporting of the COVID-related deaths?
Yeah, that's a good question. First thing I will repeat, the source has to be credible. In certain circumstances, like in normal circumstances, we have many options to cross check. And any journalist has to cross check. When I say that source has to be credible, means that if health ministry has issued some directions, some precautions which need to be taken by a person during this time, now that's a credible source. Now there could be many credible sources. The health ministry can be one credible source, the WHO can be another credible source, the Indian Council of Medical Research can be another credible source. So there can be multiple credible sources. So what a journalist can do, they can refer to multiple credible sources which are available depending what kind of reporting you are doing. So you should not blindly rely what is being said by the government. So as I gave you already the example, you can cross check. That is one. Two, you can further cross check through other sources. Say for instance, if the government figures says that these many people are affected, these many tests have been conducted, now you have to rely on that. You cannot discount that. But again, how can you cross check? You can cross check by going to a hospital to find out how many tests have been conducted there. And if there is a difference in number, the number which was given by the government sources, government spokesperson, the number that you got by going to a hospital, and there is a mismatch, you can always report that mismatch. That is what actually the journalism is. But then you cannot go to unauthentic sources. Either one, you rely on the authentic source, reliable source, official source. Two, you can depend on your own account, by your own investigation, by going on the spot and finding what is the truth. Thirdly, definitely to some extent, you can go to the account of the eyewitnesses or the other people concerned. Say, for instance, I extend the earlier example. You went to the hospital and found, then I'm taking a very hypothetical thing, that 1000 tests have been conducted into that hospital. That's told to you by the hospital superintendent, while the government has said 2000 tests have been conducted. Then you talk to some doctor or some paramedical staff in confidence, and you find that only 500 tests have been conducted. Now, that figure can also be quoted if you feel that that doctor, that paramedical staff is believable. Then you can use all three figures to tell your story. Under normal circumstances, I will tell any journalist these things. But then again, this is a difficult situation. So you have to be doubly sure that if you are using these kinds of journalistic practices, you have to question yourself whether this will harm somewhere the society. If you have the little apprehension that this could be harmful, this could be damaging, then you can restrain yourself. Restraining is very, very important in journalism. If I get something as a journalist, this does not mean that immediately I will go on air, immediately I will write that. I have to think about that. I have to analyze myself whether this is worth broadcasting, worth publishing. Only then that should be broadcast or published.
All right. I hope you must have got your answer regarding the authentic source. All right. We have another question from Devanshi, who says that what happens if the media person gets affected while covering? Who covers for their life?
In a way, I was referring to that. I would definitely like to further elaborate on this. This is the most pertinent thing that anybody should think of. If what the government has done, and let me tell you this without criticizing the government, even if, I mean, I don't bother criticizing the government for the reason that I have been a practicing journalist, and it's not the question of criticism. The question is, if the things are not good, and if the practices are not good, and if the government or the concerned government department and officials, they are not bothered, then we have to be a little critical. And if I look at the media from that perspective, media is the most neglected lot as compared to professions in any sector. When I say neglected, neglected from the government, neglected from the policymakers, neglected by the promoters and the proprietors of a media organization. In the sense that even in normal circumstances, hardly there is no pension to be given to the journalists. They are not given any health cover by their organizations. They are not protected by the owners or by the company where they are working. This has always been there, and nobody would have raised their voice in that direction. And any government has not thought of doing something in this. Now, coming to this pandemic, what is happening? And I said that this media person and journalists, they are the worst lot as compared to other sectors. But then I am not saying that in other sectors things are good. For instance, in pandemic, two sectors, people belonging to two professions are considered very important. One, the policemen, another is the doctors. Now, policemen are also very neglected. They do not get good salaries. They do not have good working conditions, even in normal circumstances. But during this time, the government has thought of about them, and certain compensations are being given to them, so that if they die during their performing their duty, and then all care is being given, like if a policeman gets affected, he is being quarantined for 15 days. The medical care is being provided by the government. Same is with the doctors. If a doctor gets affected, then infected, then he is being quarantined quarantine, the whole expenses are being borne by the government. And then if some death occurs, then obviously the government is announcing relief package, the compensation to the family. But no such thing the any state government or the central government has done till date, except some stray things have happened, like something has been announced by Assam government, something has announced by Odisha government. But then except, as far as I remember, except Assam government, which has announced relief if a journalist dies while covering COVID-19. That's the only state government. No state government has done this. The central government has not thought about the journalists and the media persons. The only thing that the central government has been doing and is doing is simply having some words of appreciation for the journalists who are working day and night. So the central government believes that the journalists can do away with any facility, and the journalist can go away with whatever appreciation. So journalists are relying only the appreciation. No hard measures or no substantial measures are being taken for them.
I'm sure after listening to you, the things like, of course, we all need to gather up together, being media professionals. Of course, things need to be done. Another question which I feel is very relevant is students want to ask: is bachelor's enough for journalism, or do they need to go for masters as well?
Both the options are open, and there is no difference as such. If you get into the bachelor's degree, then obviously one benefit is there. Then if you have made up your mind that you will do something in media only, then obviously bachelor's is the best thing, because within 2 years or so, you will learn the trick of the trade. You will acquire the essential skills and whatever is necessary to practice media. And then after 2 years, or at the most after 3 years, after you complete your graduation, you will be in the job market and you will get a good job depending on your caliber, your skills, and the availability of jobs. But then if you are doing it at the master's level and you are doing any regular normal bachelor's degree, whether it's a BA or BCom or BSc, then obviously after that you have to take up a 1 year master's program, 1 year diploma, PG diploma from some good institution, or a 2 years master's program. So this means your entry in the job will be delayed at least by 1 to 2 years. But then both the options are open depending as to what kind of planning somebody would have done about his or her career.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for taking up so many questions. We are just about to end this session. I can't take any more questions because I've got the signal. So thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you on behalf of School of Journalism and Mass Communication, Kia Mangalam University, and all my participants for enlightening us and telling us in detail. Because of course, at this particular moment where media is functioning 24/7, all of these parents and these students who are pursuing journalism had a lot of doubts in their mind, and I'm sure that this particular session must have helped them to know how will things function in the post-COVID era. So till then, I request everyone. So sorry for if I have missed any question. You can still drop on all your Q&A in the comment box on Facebook page. You can see us there, and we will try to answer all the possible comments there. So till then, take care. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.